What's it all about? It's about the art of conversation, and so in many ways you've all already became part of the exhibit just by talking with each other, and it's all about people meeting people, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, we need that now more than ever.
We talk a lot about the scope between partnerships between the government and the private sector. Do you see potential for partnerships and innovation and more responsive, externally driven governance in the third sector?
Yeah, great question. So absolutely. So, we forget there's a third sector, and actually that's perhaps the most interesting sector. You need three pillars really in society, and I think that's a very interesting sector. And it's a very large sector. So many activities come under that. And I study innovation, and I've been really interested in how we see a lot of innovation happening in that space. Mm-hmm. And we have spaces typically in communities. For instance, they're called maker spaces or make spaces or tech shops or fab labs. They're typically workshops where you get access to traditional tools, but also digital manufacturing tools. And most importantly, you get access to a community of like-minded makers. And a lot of our students hang out in the make space in the heart of Cambridge, and they mix with people from tech companies and so on. And then they're trying to actually develop solutions to problems in their communities around pollution, for instance. So they're learning a lot, and this goes back to your question about preparing for the future of work and the workplace, but also opening your mind. And in these spaces, you see both of these things happening at the same time. And I'm particularly optimistic about that aspect, those kinds of movements, because it's bottom up, and this is, I think, the way of the future. So you have distributed manufacturing. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of it, including our local hospital, Admirals, didn't have access to PPE for the frontline workers because global supply chains, and they made them in the makespace. So the makespace were 3D printing visors and so on, and then they shared these designs globally for others to download and so on. They were making ventilators out of scuba diving equipment and sharing the designs around the world for others to do locally. So I think that's a very interesting and promising part of our future economic activity and social.
Two things I'd like to pick up from that. One is that open source point. There's some incredibly exciting stuff going on around sustainable housing that's open source. Where people can literally download designs and then create them locally out of locally sort of hewn wood, etc. And I think that this idea that open source can actually create a whole range of sustainable opportunities where people can then see exactly what to do, because a lot of people can't move from A to B on this journey because they don't know what to do. They may know they need to recycle or stop flying or go to a renewable energy company or things like that. But what other parts of their life are they going to change? How are they going to think where their food comes from? What the buildings they're going to live in? What transport they take? Because it's energy, buildings, transport, and food that are the big components. But I think that open source is one big innovative answer that potentially is incredibly exciting as a partnership between government and the private sector. I think the other one is, what kind of business is it? And the government in Wales encourages social enterprises, and they have absolutely played a stormer during COVID, because a social enterprise that actually started off helping people with learning disabilities by making uniforms, so you can see where this is going in the context of COVID, but also had a shredding of private documents company, and also then fabricated using 3D design, and had 25 outlets in Wales, suddenly became something, creating PPE and delivering it with all the logistics in place. And because it was a social enterprise, no shareholders. And I think that big point is, let's have companies that are not shareholders, that are community-based for the services and the making we need in our communities. And that's the way we get a circular economy, and we don't end up with the big companies, particularly like the fossil fuel companies, that even when they knew back in 1991 they were causing the problem, carried on doing more and more because they had to pay back to shareholders. We need different company models. So innovation in company models is absolutely key. And the big opportunity for all of you, if you want to be small startups to create something in entirely different kinds of ways.
Yeah, with, not for.
With, not for,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Collaborative,
Yeah.
long-term, preventative,
Yeah.
involving people about
Yeah.
whom decisions are being made,
Yeah.
etc.
I feel cross with myself and frustrated that in my time chairing a very big NHS trust in Birmingham and being involved in the system, I have consistently thought to myself, there is a real the NHS is a brilliant thing, but it doesn't half crowd out the third sector and interesting community and other contributions. And I haven't succeeded in finding a way to. I mean, there have been some interesting individual innovations, like the role of third sector organisations in our emergency department in tackling violence, for example, but we haven't really cracked it in the system.
Over the last 12 months, some really powerful examples of what the private sector can do really badly and what the public sector can do very well. And so what matters is the partnership, that key word, between the two. And the key to that is transparency.
Yes.
And much more transparency than we currently get. And that requires media that are not quite as politically committed as we've got. It's in all our interest to have transparency from failures on both sides of the partnership to be communicated properly, and they're not, frankly. Public sector fails and gets away with it, and the private sector fails and gets away with it. But what really damages the partnership and the idea of a partnership is the kind of behaviour of this government over the last, well, this year in particular, with the crony sort of ism of a government looking after its mates. That really undermines trust and confidence, not just on this issue, but a whole lot of other issues too.
Recording.